Hey there, Rod Yates here. Thanks for joining me on another episode of Humans of Music, a Jaxsta podcast. Each episode, I talk to a music creator or industry professional about their life and career, the ups and downs of their journey, and the lessons they've learned along the way. And my guest today is Australian singer-songwriter Emma Swift. Last year, Emma released an album of Bob Dylan covers called Blonde on the Tracks. She never intended to release these covers when she started recording them a few years ago, and only really began to entertain the idea when COVID hit and her touring income dried up. The fact that the album has garnered Emma worldwide acclaim is just another twist in a career full of them. In some ways, that career began when Emma was a music-loving kid growing up in rural Australia before she moved to Sydney and started playing in the pubs and clubs. In 2013, she moved once again, this time to Nashville to pursue music full-time, and she's been there ever since. We talk about that journey in this interview, as well as Emma's love of Bob Dylan, her earliest musical memories, and much more. I sat down with Emma in Sydney in early June, a day after she'd just been released from the 14-day quarantine, which every international traveller to Australia has to do when they arrive in the country. That means Emma was taken to a hotel as soon as she stepped off the plane and locked in her room for 2 weeks, and we started by talking about what that experience was like.
It's very strange to live in a hotel for 14 days. I think that musicians are uniquely equipped to deal with that scenario, though. I mean, if you've ever been on tour, it's quite a lot like being on tour.
Right.
And except that you don't get to leave, you don't see any other humans, and food comes delivered in a paper bag to the door.
Right. And you don't get a key, do you? You get shown to your room and that's no key, no nothing, and we'll see you in 14 days beyond someone giving you food.
There's no key, and there's a security guard who makes sure that you don't leave and don't breach quarantine. I was really lucky. I'd heard some nightmare stories from people, very small rooms with no window, but I had a nice big room and a balcony, and I could open the window
Oh, you
and
could. That's a
and
big
look
thing.
down across the city. And Sydney's such a beautiful city,
Yeah.
so it was very picturesque in a way,
Right.
but also quite lonely. And it's not good. We're social creatures, and
Yeah.
to be kind of stuck inside my own head that was definitely challenging.
Yeah, for 2 weeks.
Mm.
And because you'd come, I know you live in Nashville, but I think you'd actually been in London for 7 months prior. Is that right?
That's right. I had been in London.
Okay.
I'm married to a Brit, and so I'm still very much American based. I've got a green card, and most of my work is usually there.
Yeah.
But with the pandemic kind of stretching on and on and on, as musicians, it's really ambiguous, when we're actually going to be back to full steam ahead. We just don't know. So I found myself in London in lockdown and then arrived in Australia and got put into lockdown. And it's quite magnificent and really wonderful and pretty emotional to be out and about in the
Really?
real world.
Just because it's so different to your experiences in the States and in London?
Yeah, I've been very isolated,
Mm.
and I mean, as has everybody there, but even, I mean, things like human touch, not being able to hug people or even see your friends or family, that's
Mhm.
quite difficult. But then once they let me out of quarantine in Sydney, because Sydney has been very blessed with a lucky run with
Sure.
COVID. I got to hug my nephew for the first time.
Right, nice.
That's, get tears in my eyes thinking about it. So
Yeah.
it's very special.
So how has the last 12 months been for you? Because on the one hand, you've been in isolation and you've been in London, so you've been displaced from Nashville. On the other hand, you've put out this record, Blonde on the Tracks, that is doing really well and getting great reviews and being very successful. So professionally, that sounds like things are actually, you've had this really good sort of, I guess, silver lining to everything that's been going on.
It's so funny because prior to 2020, I wouldn't have thought it were possible to have the best year of your life and the most difficult year of your life at the same time. But that's certainly what happened for me. Very big highs and lows creatively and personally, just dealing with the challenges of the pandemic.
Mm.
I mean, the Blonde on the Tracks record, though, I'm just so lucky. It's had an extraordinary run. When I announced it last year, I didn't anticipate that people would be so kind or generous, and that it would be so loved by listeners, but it really has found an audience.
Yeah.
And that's just so special. I made the record and I initially pressed 300 copies on vinyl. And I thought, yeah, I'll be really lucky if I can sell 300 copies. And then just out the door it went. It went. And I think I underestimated myself.
Yeah.
And I also underestimated how interested people would be in my interpretations of Bob Dylan songs.
Okay.
And so it's been a wild ride.
Yeah. When you say that you underestimated yourself, is that something that you sort of have fought with throughout your career?
Absolutely. It's definitely a pattern that I have. But I think that Bob Dylan, so many people have sung his songs before. There was nothing really unique or special in the idea.
Mm,
And when you're an artist, when you're a singer, you're too close. I can hope that the music makes a connection with people,
yeah.
but I can't be certain that it will. And I'm just so glad that it has.
Yeah.
I just love singing these songs and I love interpreting the songs and following in a long tradition of singers that I've admired,
Yeah.
from Jimi Hendrix to Nina Simone to Joan Baez to Cat Power. I really feel very grateful for them for setting down a path that I could walk down.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for listeners for not going, oh, no, not this again, not
Right.
another bloody Bob Dylan cover. Ugh. I mean, there are certainly some people who feel that way, but for the most part, the record has been really well received.
Yeah, nice. Am I right in thinking that initially when you recorded the songs, that the plan wasn't really for them to come out? Because I think you did 6 songs in around about 2016, 17 as a way of overcoming writer's block and depression. And then that actually worked. And so you sort of parked them for a little while and started working on your own material in 2018, 2019. And then COVID hits and your touring income is gone. But you've got these Bob Dylan songs which you recorded. Did that then become was there then a practical reason to release them? Was that the way it rolled out?
Absolutely. The reason to release the record was because I'd lost my touring job and I needed to find work for myself.
Mm.
I suddenly found myself unemployed, a lot of time on my hands and not much going on, but a Dropbox that had 6 beautifully recorded Bob Dylan songs. And again, that uncertainty in myself, I'd been a bit reluctant to put it out, but then the pandemic hit and I just thought, you know what, I'm going to record 2 more Dylan songs, round this project out, make it a full length album and release it. And so that's what happened.
Yeah. And one of I think you've referred to I Contain Multitudes of Rough and Rowdy Ways as sort of almost like the missing piece
It
in the
was.
puzzle. In what
It,
way?
it was the icing on the cake. I had a feeling that there was something missing from the record, but I couldn't identify what it was. And then when Dylan released I Contain Multitudes, I immediately became enchanted by the song. It's a love song, a hymn to music and poetry and art. It's very funny as well as quite emotional too. And that's the Bob Dylan that I'm the super fan of, the tragicomic
Right.
Dylan. I love a song that can make me laugh and cry at the same time. And I Contain Multitudes definitely did that for me. And so I really wanted to record it. And in doing so, I then knew that the project was ready.
Okay.
I mean, it's funny with Dylan too, because so many people have done his songs over time. But I believe I was the first person to do I Contain Multitudes.
Right.
and that never happens, I imagine a whole bunch of people have recorded loads of tracks from Rough
Sure.
and Rowdy Ways now, but
You were
I
the
did
first.
manage to get off the mark. He also released Murder Most Foul. That was the first single.
Okay.
And that song's absolutely brilliant, but it's also 17 minutes. And my record's already got Sad Eyed Lady
I was
of the
gonna say.
Lowlands. So I already run one marathon on the album. So
Right. So what was it like going back and revisiting those songs in your Dropbox? Because they were recorded at a time when you weren't feeling great. Could you hear that in the recordings?
Oh, yes. And I think it's to any artist listening, I would absolutely recommend giving yourself a little bit of space from a project. You get perspective
Hmm.
and you can be a bit kinder to the art. There's that tendency to be very critical, I think, or just embed a project with worry. But over time, I became more philosophical and I could hear the sad person in those songs that recorded the album.
Mm.
And I mean, it was a Prozac project. It was an audio Prozac going into a recording studio and just trying to get reconnected with music
Mm.
again and remember why I loved it because I had writer's block and Nashville's a terrible town to have writer's block in. It's
Yeah.
really because there's so many great musicians doing wonderful things all the time. And so when I listen back to Blonde on the Tracks now, it is a very it's coming from a quite dark place,
Hmm.
a quite sorrowful place, but it's also got hope in it and it's got humor too.
Yeah.
So some songs, I mean, a song like Going, Going, Gone is full of longing and yearning. And as is my interpretation of You're a Big Girl Now, that's a
Hmm.
kind of resignation, I think, in the way that I've done that song. But then I'll do the man in me and I'm having a laugh at myself because that was really about part of the reason for doing Dylan's songs was whatever confidence I lacked in my own abilities, I was supremely confident in his abilities as a songwriter.
But that comes back to that thing again, that underestimating your own abilities.
I think that that's natural for
Yeah.
artists. It's the force that drives us all on and it's the blessing and the curse of creation.
Yeah.
It's if we didn't have doubt, we probably wouldn't do it at all.
And you mentioned Going, Going, Gone, and I've seen you talk about recording that song, and I think you even said it was sort of the lowest ebb in your life when you recorded that song. Did you choose that song in particular because of that moment, or is it just coincidence?
I was very moved by Going, Going, Gone, and I wanted to also honour some of Dylan's lesser known tracks
Mm.
because to me that song is heartbreakingly beautiful, but not many people talk about Planet Waves
Mm.
as an album.
Yeah.
And as a Dylan fan, I didn't want to approach the project and just sing his hits because that would not be very fun or very courageous
Sure.
either. You've got to. I really wanted to draw attention to some more unusual songs.
So I think Blonde on Blonde was the first Dylan album you bought when you were in Sydney in the early 2000s.
Yeah, I mean, I had heard it before.
Okay. But in terms of actually
It
buying
had
your
been
first.
around, yeah. So I got a copy of Blonde on vinyl and I just absolutely fell in love with it. And I love vinyl records. I mean, I have to say that every single song chosen for my album was chosen from a Bob Dylan record in my personal vinyl collection. I didn't go to a streaming service or online and look up every single Dylan song ever written. I just went to the albums that I
Right.
have. And with the exception of I Contain Multitudes because Rough and Rowdy Ways wasn't out yet.
So what made you pick it up that day though when you were in that secondhand store in Sydney? Is it just because you had heard it previously and you liked it, or was there something about that moment?
It felt like a rite of passage. It's funny being from my generation. I was born in the 80s and grew up as a teenager in the 90s, really super into Britpop
Yeah.
and bands like the Smiths, and then Blur and Pulp and
Yeah.
it's all descended from Dylan, but I needed to get back to the source.
Okay.
and so I guess I went to it knowing that I was about to be taken to school. Uh, there was something that was about to be revealed to me, and I didn't know what. And so I picked it up, and it's been with me ever since. I think I've got 3 copies of Blonde on Blonde now.
Okay.
Whenever I see it, I buy it.
Yeah.
I've also done that with Neil Young on the beach. I've got many copies of Nashville Skyline. And when I met my husband, we're both Bob Dylan fans, so that just the multiples multiplied. We contain multitudes of the same Dylan record, some in mono, some in stereo,
Yeah.
some pressed in the UK, some pressed in the US. And
Is there a difference? Can you hear the difference?
I mean, I'm not that much of a nerd, to be honest, but I love having them around.
Right, okay. So prior to that moment, you just mentioned you were into Britpop. But so had Dylan been much of a part of your life prior to that moment where you bought the record?
Yes, I mean, I feel like Dylan was part of everybody's lives in the 80s and the 90s, even though he was no longer a pop star as such. He was more like an uncle figure.
Mm-hmm.
He was Lucky Wilbury when I was growing up.
Right.
Yeah, he was Dylan with the earring and in a band with Roy Orbison. He was in a supergroup. So I didn't get to know the Dylan that people first fell in love with. I got a more kind of senior, mature Dylan, and then I kind of have had fun getting to know him
Sure.
as much as one can know perhaps the most elusive man in rock and roll. But it's getting to know the songs.
Sure.
And the wonderful thing is that there's always new material. It's an archaeological dig that never ends.
Right.
With his archives, and that's really lovely.
Yeah, it's a lot to explore. So if you go back even further than that, am I right in thinking that your first, I guess, moment of really, really sort of music getting its hooks into you was when you got a pink cassette recorder when you were 5 years old?
Yes, you've really done your research. Yeah, I was always very into music, singing into hairbrushes and all that kind of cliche little girl kid stuff.
What were you singing?
Bananarama, the Bangles, Kylie Minogue. So my parents bought me this pink Sony cassette deck, in the peak of the boombox era, and I just felt like a queen in my bedroom, waking up in the morning and just like blasting the B-52s. I remember they put out Cosmic Thing and I just became obsessed with Love Shack, and I would get out my cassette player and hit record and just tape Love Shack every single time I heard it on the radio. So I would have a Maxell cassette that had 45 minutes of Love Shack in various edited forms, depending on when I tuned in. But I've always been very enchanted by music and singers and just the radio.
Yeah. And what were your parents were they bringing music into the house as well?
Absolutely. Very much classic rock. They came of age in the 70s. So they were late teenagers in the early 70s. So through them, I got people like Linda Ronstadt, Neil Young, Marianne Faithfull, and a bit of Oz rock too, because I'm Australian.
Yeah.
So, or New Zealand rock, Split Ends, stuff like that.
No Bob Dylan in there though.
Not really. My Dylan was more. That was through my my aunt actually. That's where the Dylan line came in. I mean, you have to remember too that in the 80s, records were harder to come by, and the 90s. Like, it starts to get, you're really at the mercy of what was being reissued on CD.
That's it.
By that point.
And I think a really pivotal moment for you is when we're seeing Sinead O'Connor sing Nothing Compares to You on video hits or whatever it was in the morning on Australian TV.
On Australian TV, they had a lot of music video programming on a Saturday and a Sunday morning, and I used to get up, super early and watch these shows. And I remember just being possessed by Sinead O'Connor singing Nothing Compares to You, and she cries in that music video, and it's so real. And I watched that, and I just thought, that's what I want to do.
It was that moment.
It was that moment, and it's funny the way the universe delivers these things to you, though, because I do have a naturally sad timbre in my voice, and that Irish ancestry and the folk tradition is something that's sort of carried around in my ancestral DNA. So it's funny to be drawn to that, because I was equally, I mentioned the B-52s, I was equally in love with Kate Pearson and Cindy Wilson, but I didn't want to put on a wig and sing kind of Rock Lobster or kind of party songs. I was like, oh man, this really depressing sounding Irish girl, this is where it's at. That's what I want to do. And I would have been 9.
Yeah, right. So you immediately identified with that sadness, because I think I've read a quote where you said that not only was that the moment you knew you wanted to do that, but that was also the moment you knew you wanted to sing sad songs.
Yes, very much. I knew that I think that there's something incredibly cathartic about music, and I wanted to be a part of that.
Mm.
I love the emotional aspect of it. I mean, I can't wait to play live again because I think that being in a room and listening to people play is just about one of the most holy and spiritual experiences a
Yeah,
human being can have.
yeah. And so you're discovering all this music while you're growing up in Wagga Wagga?
I was not in Wagga Wagga at that point. My parents were teachers, so we lived all around. We moved everywhere. So I was in Victoria in South Gippsland at that point,
Right.
and then I moved to Wagga Wagga as a teenager.
Okay.
And I mean, I was always singing though. I loved it. And my family don't play. None of my family are musicians.
Really?
So it sort of came out of nowhere,
Yeah.
and yet was everywhere. It seemed predestined.
So what was where do you start? Where do you start playing? Like if it's not in the house, there's no instruments in the house, where do you start?
Oh, the school choir.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, singing in the school choir and singing in local Eisteddfods and singing with my friends.
Yeah.
And then once I got to high school, joining the high school blues band and having fun with that.
And how's it making you feel? Like can you remember that moment of being in a choir and actually was it a visceral sort of
Oh,
feeling?
I loved it. I really enjoyed singing harmony, 4-part harmony in a choir is really special.
Mm.
I vividly recall being 11 and getting really, really upset with George Harrison because the soprano part in Here Comes the Sun in the arrangement that our choir had to do was really hard. I was like, come on, this song is way too high.
So you took it out on George.
And I took it out on George.
So what's the next step from going from being in a choir to actually performing? Was that a logical progression for you in terms of just being yourself up on stage?
Yeah, I guess so. A reasonably logical progression. I was really fortunate to go to a high school where there was a school blues band and to get up and front the band. And
Yeah.
I mean, I remember taking a music class in early high school, though, where I got handed a saxophone. And I think I lasted about 3 classes. I was like, I'll just have the mic, thank you. I didn't have the patience to learn to play the sax, so it was
Right.
just easier to sing.
Were you a natural?
I am a natural singer, yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Very lucky in that respect.
And performer?
Performer probably less so. I think that took a little bit of training. It's something that shifts over time.
Mm.
In high school, it's more difficult because I didn't have the opportunity to go and see rock and roll bands. I watched music videos on telly and I
Yeah.
watched live concerts, but it wasn't really until I moved to Sydney to go to college,
Yeah.
university here, and go and see bands
Yeah.
that I got an idea about what performance meant and what it means to be compelling on stage and
Sure.
how to move and how to dress
Yeah.
and I think every time I've really missed that with the pandemic. I feel like every time I go to a show, there's something that I learn each and every time. Particularly seeing people like Brian Ferry on stage, for example, a natural crooner,
Right.
so charming and so sexy and brilliant. I mean, it's really good to go to those shows and go, yeah, I think I'm going to do that. That move, I dig it. I like that.
I'll take it. After the break, Emma talks about growing up in Wagga, her big move to Nashville, and the practicalities of running her own record label. Welcome back to Humans of Music and my interview with Emma Swift. So before we talk about Sydney, just quickly, your teen years in Wagga. I mean, what was that like as a place as a teenager? Because
Terrible.
I was going to say it's for people who aren't from Australia, it's a country town, about 50,000, so slightly bigger than a country town.
I guess
but-
when I was growing up there, it was about 50,000 people. It's the largest inland city in New South Wales.
Okay.
which is a nice way of saying it's sort of in the middle of nowhere. It's really, really hard
Okay.
to get to the capital cities. And in the pre-internet days, that was pretty isolating as
Mm.
well. So one way to connect with the outside world and even learn about the outside world was through good old-fashioned music mags like Rolling Stone and Uncut and Mojo and getting those and taking them home and seeing, oh, what is Los Angeles? What is it? Because Wagga's very, I mean, for American listeners, the best way to describe it is it's a wheat belt town.
Mm.
It's like growing up in Kansas, really. I mean, I'm not the only Australian musician to have the regional upbringing, though. It seems to work. It worked for Nick Cave.
Right. Were there other options for you there? Were there career options that you could see, or were you always going towards music?
I don't know if I was always going towards music, but I was definitely always going towards the metropolis.
Okay.
And what was on the other side of the metropolis, I wasn't too sure. I became a journalist first. I was a radio newsreader
Yeah.
and broadcaster, and I think that was that uncertainty because Wagga is very much, and it's probably changed now, but I feel like when I was growing up, it was like, oh, that's lovely that you're a singer, but what are you going to do for your real job?
Right.
And so I really kind of internalized that and moved to the city and did a very impractical English literature degree. So my feet have never been firmly planted in reality. And then the older I've got, the more self-knowledge I've had, the further away I've drifted. But yeah, I came up to Sydney and then I think music just revealed itself to me over time.
Okay.
It was in my late 20s, having had a proper career and having proved to myself that I could work a day job
Yeah.
and earn a wage and be employed and be in an office. When the glamour of office life wore off, I thought I might go and try Nashville on for size and see what happens.
Yeah, that's funny, isn't it? Because a lot of people would look at it the other way around. Like, I'm going to have my fallback position, which is in the office, but I'm going to pursue music first. But you kind of did that the other way around. You sort of proved to yourself that you could do a job if you had to, and then went and did music. Is that the way it went?
That's the way it went, and I'm very grateful and happy that that is how it went because I think that gave me a really safe place to land, and I really needed it. You know, I'm not independently wealthy or anything. I wasn't, and there wasn't really an option to move back to mum and dad's or anything like that. So I'm grateful to have been a journalist and got myself a trade, as they say.
Have you ever had to rely on it again since you left the? Because you were in like radio broadcast, is that right? You had the show on FBI community radio here, and you're also a newsreader on Triple J, which is like the big national youth station.
Yeah, I was a newsreader, and reading the news is really fun, but I haven't had to do it since then.
Okay.
I've been really lucky. I mean, that's the thing. Australia's really small, particularly for the kind of music that I play, that sort of indie folk, old-fashioned sound. Um, you can't tour here
Mm.
eternally the way that you can in the United States. So part of the dream of going to Nashville was, okay, I've upended myself. My visa only permits me to do music work and nothing else. And I'm going to have to scramble and make it work.
Right.
But if I can make it work, it will be immensely rewarding. And it has been. Just before I left, I read this wonderful music biography by Jimmy McDonough. He wrote the Neil Young book Shaky, but he also wrote one called Tammy Wynette, Tragic Country Queen.
Okay.
And she moved to Nashville with 3 kids and a license from beauty school. And I thought, if she can move with 3 kids and still pursue that dream, really, I've got nothing to be afraid of or to chicken out
Right.
about.
But so prior to moving to Nashville, so even in that time in Sydney where you're on radio, presumably you're performing as well? You're writing songs, you're performing in clubs and pubs?
I'd started playing shows
Mm.
and just absolutely loving it,
Mm.
really enjoying singing, and started writing my own songs and then the more gigs I played, I'd work all day in the office and then I'd race home and do my makeup and get glam and then go on stage. The more gigs I did, the more I really was like, oh, yeah, I just want to do this all the time.
Right. When was your first? Do you remember?
I d I don't remember.
Okay.
I would say it was probably, I did sing harmonies at the Hopetoun Hotel for a lot of friends of mine in the early 2000s, but
Okay.
playing my own shows, that would have been late 2000s, probably somewhere like Notes in Newtown or
Okay.
the Excelsior Hotel or the Sandringham. For listeners at home who don't know Sydney and its appalling record with live music venues, none of those places exist
It's
anymore.
sad, isn't it?
Um, but it was a really great place to have an apprenticeship.
Yeah.
There used to be a real scene, and I believe it's coming back again. It's been
Yep.
revitalised, and I can't wait to go check it out.
Yeah, nice.
But unfortunately, a lot of the places I've once played have closed.
Yeah. And in terms of the songwriting, I've seen you talk about being raised Catholic, and I saw a quote from you where you said that you've always felt like you were supposed to repress your emotions or drink them away. Does that make songwriting difficult because songwriting is all about emoting and putting your emotions out there? Did you have to sort of overcome that upbringing to do that?
I think so. I have repressed rising as the Catholic. It's the Catholic way. And I think that part of the struggle when I did go and begin the Bob Dylan Songs project in 2017 was that I hadn't worked out how to express myself properly, to
Mm,
articulate my feelings in song. And that's really what it's all about.
mm,
And I've got a lot closer to that now with the help of therapy and and I'm a bit older,
sure.
and I think, yeah, I'm almost 40, and I'm at a point where I really understand my patterns of behavior, and
Okay.
it's so funny how many times you can write the same song. Oh, it's that feeling again.
But was there something about the Dylan songs that really helped you? Was it just studying how he writes lyrics or something? What was it about that helped you express your emotions?
I think the way that he has the ability to say something so very poignant and moving and beautiful, and then say something kind of sarcastic and acerbic,
Yeah,
that juxtaposition
sure.
taught me so much about songwriting
Okay.
and taught me about having fun with songwriting.
Mm,
I think I was a little bit too caught up in this has to be right. This has to be perfect. This has to be the ultimate and songs don't have to be that. They're just like records. They're
yeah.
just a moment in time, and it doesn't matter.
And you can write the next one.
And you just move on and you write the next one.
Yeah, that's a big lesson.
It is. I've been thinking sort of half joking but half serious that when I do put the follow-up record out, which is all my own songs,
Mm.
it should have one of those warning stickers, but instead of saying warning explicit language, it would say warning contains Catholic themes. And yeah, I used to love you too, as well as Sinead O'Connor, and that sort of biblical
Yeah.
stuff. It does come up.
So you land in Nashville,
Mhm.
which you have an idea in your head about what it's going to be like, and this is a new beginning. What is it? What is that first day like? What happens when you step off the plane and here you are?
It was absolutely brilliant. Those first few years in Nashville were glorious. As a super music fan and someone who loved going to shows, there was just music happening everywhere all the time, and a really eclectic array of music. I mean, just the history of songwriting and recorded music in Tennessee, so you've got Nashville, but you've also got Memphis 3
Mm.
hours down the street. I caught the Greyhound bus and went to Graceland, and to be in Elvis Presley's house, that kind of stuff, when you put in perspective that, I grew up in Wagga Wagga, that stuff is very magical
Yeah.
and very sacred and cool.
Did you feel a part of the community? Like, where do you even start?
It's a very friendly town, and you
Mm.
start at the bar. I started at a bar called the Five Spot, and that's still one of my favourite places to play in town, and it's still one of my favourite places to go and check out live music. When when live music is happening.
Yeah.
And it's a very friendly community. I think the hardest thing about Nashville is that because it's so music focused, after a while in the city, I really began to yearn for the other things that feed one's life,
Mm,
like visual art and theatre and the ocean being Australian. I mean, there's visual art and theatre in Nashville, but it's smaller,
sure.
and it does start to feel like a country town in a way. And I don't mean country music. I
Mm,
mean like a rural town, but with an incredible, unrivaled music
okay.
scene.
And so how did you satiate that desire for the ocean and for art? And
Well, fortunately enough, being a touring musician, it just means that every single city that I've ever been to, I stop off and go to the art gallery if I can.
nice.
And that's fantastic. Just before COVID, I happened to be on tour in Italy, which is just such a brilliant place to go on tour. I mean, the best writers in the world can be found in Italy.
Sure. The best
So,
writers, did you say?
writers,
Like,
like the backstage
yeah.
is like, oh my God, these pastries, the wine. They know how to cater for you. But at the end of the tour, we had 3 days off in Rome before heading back to the United States and going and seeing the Caravaggios in the churches. And that just feeds the soul.
Yeah. It must be a steep learning curve when you initially start touring around America, is it? Because as you mentioned in Australia, we're not used to the endless tour that can go and go and go because there's only so many places you can play. Was it a learning curve for you to hit the ground in the States and start touring?
Definitely a learning curve. And what it really did do was help me get inside America and, sort of literally moving about in it, but starting to understand what the actual place was like,
Mm.
instead of, okay, this is what I learned on The Simpsons as a kid,
Yeah.
and this is what it's actually like. And I mean, in Australia, I think that it's hard to imagine that cities can be so different the way
Mm.
that they are in America, that how distinct Chicago is from New York or Los Angeles or Portland or Austin, Texas or San Antonio. It's so vivid
Yeah.
and really beautiful.
And it sounds like, in terms of your career in Nashville, it sounds like you've built up almost a small business around yourself. Would that be fair to say? I mean, with the album coming out, is it Tiny Ghost is the record label that you formed, and it's effectively you. And you've looked after the artwork for Blonde on the Tracks. You've done the videos for Blonde on the Tracks. I don't know if you still do this, but you were the one packing the albums to send out and doing all that very independent. Was that something that you had coveted, or was that out of necessity? What took you down such an independent route?
It was one part necessity and another part business savvy. Because I mean the fact is that if you run the record label, you get to make all the money yourself. And in a pandemic, that's very helpful.
Yeah.
It's lovely to have label support. I'd kill to have label support. But I'd also watched some of my heroes have their own record labels.
Mm,
Gillian Welch has Akeney Records and has for years. And Jason Isbell also puts his music out himself.
mm.
And they're exceptionally well regarded. I don't think it's as punk rock as it used to be to have your own label. It's more the smart business thing to do, I would
Yeah.
say.
Was it a savior during COVID?
Absolutely. I mean, being stuck at home, nowhere to go, too terrified to leave the house, you need something to keep you busy. And if
Mm.
that thing is stuffing vinyl LPs into record mailers and addressing them and shipping them off, so be it.
Because you mentioned that you initially pressed 300.
Mm.
When was the next pressing? Like, how quickly did all that happen?
About a week after because I ran it as a pre-order,
Yeah.
and 7 days into the pre-order, I thought, oh, I think I better order some more copies. This is good.
That's great.
And then I thought, well, if I'm ordering vinyl, I may as well get cassette in honor of that pink Sony
Yeah.
boombox.
What a great, I was going to say problem to have. Clearly it wasn't a problem, but what a great unexpected? Because it was unexpected.
It was. It really took me by surprise, and it's nice when life surprises you, yeah.
So you mentioned some of those people like Gillian Welsh and Jason Isbell who had independent labels.
Mhm.
Was there anyone that you knew that you could actually talk to about doing it, or people who could give you advice?
I did all of my apprenticeship by Googling blogs and watching YouTube videos on
Really?
on how to. And so if you're listening and you're thinking about it, it's all there on the internet, which is a great thing too. 20 years ago to put a record out independently would have been much more mysterious and perhaps difficult
Mm,
process. It was harder, I think, to, I guess, being an unknown to then go, oh, I've got to find distribution now and go through the mechanics of all the things that you need to do to put out a record.
yeah.
But a great learning process.
And do you think that this is how things will continue for you?
I'm not really sure, to be honest. I mean, it's very, very hard work to run your own label. And I'm blessed with a couple of friendly helpers in Nashville who do my mailing out for me now. But if touring comes back, it would be great to have a label, mostly because I can't do it all myself. Yeah, if I'm playing shows,
That's
it's
right.
very hard to run the office as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Economically, I mean, you joked earlier that when you own the record label, you get all the money, but economically, there must be a benefit to it because I know that initially when you released the album, it wasn't on streaming services. You released it
Mhm.
through Bandcamp and physical sales. And I think I read something where you said in the first couple of weeks, or maybe or maybe you sold 400 copies, and that equated to 2 million streams in terms of the revenue you would get.
Yes, I wanted to highlight the fact that streaming doesn't really pay artists very well. And I don't think that streaming is bad, but I did feel that there was a need to mostly educate music fans because I don't think that music fans understood or understand that a million streams might pay $30 or something to the artist,
Mm,
and the rates are all very getting a fixed number on what a stream is worth is very tricky business.
right.
The maths are ambiguous.
Okay.
So I wanted to kind of say, and I think that that's a fair thing too. Like even I'm traveling a lot at the moment, so I haven't been buying vinyl the
Mm,
way that I used to. But if I see an album announcement from a friend, in the next, ones when I was in the quarantine hotel, knowing that they probably wouldn't be able to ship the record to Australia, and by the time they did, I'd be back in America. Or
yeah.
you can buy a digital download for $10. It goes to the artist,
Yeah.
and then stream the record all I like. But at least they got $10
You've made that
for it.
commitment.
Yeah, it's a way of saying I love you and I want you to continue what you're doing.
Yeah. Is it something that you think artists will start to embrace more?
I don't really know. I mean, that's the other benefit of being your own independent record label boss. You can make all your decisions, good ones and bad ones, for yourself, and then you've only got yourself to blame. But I think I can't see any record labels allowing artists
Sure.
to follow that path.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think that as an independent musician, it's a good one to pursue, at least for a bit.
Yeah, definitely. So if you think back to where you are now, as opposed to 2016, 17, when you first started recording these songs, do you think you're different as an artist?
Absolutely. I mean, no one is. We change every hour. I mean, I could be a journalist again, or a barista, or working in the bakery that I worked in when I was 15, and we're changing all the time.
Yeah,
And that's one of the beautiful things about making art is that you get to have a record of those changes.
right. But do you think that there are, because I think you're going to release your own album of original material next year. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
And so how can you hear a difference in the songs that you've been writing for that since you, I guess, embarked on the Dylan project?
I think that there's an honesty in the songs that I was really striving for before, but perhaps wasn't there.
Mm,
And I think that that's a coming of age thing as much as it is anything else. I'm a
okay.
little bit less frightened to reveal myself to the world than I used to be. And I think that that's important. And that's something I definitely learned from singing Dylan's songs too. Finding a unique way to express a desire or a want or a hopelessness or joy is really what it's all about. Whereas perhaps prior to that, I was sort of fumbling with cliches a little bit more than I am. There's a directness, I would say, to what I'm
Okay.
doing now. I hope. I mean, artists are terrible. I mean, I'm terrible at, it's not up to me
Sure.
how people interpret the songs. And that's probably for the best.
Yeah. But you can hear that element of honesty and also the ability to, I don't know if make you smile is the right word, but they're, with the song, The Soft Apocalypse. So the first single which you've released off this album when it comes out, there's definitely the lyrics in there will prick your ears and some might bring a smile to your face and then others will make you feel otherwise, which is kind of what you were talking about is what you got from Dylan. Is that an example of
I think that's very much true. The Soft Apocalypse is a confessional song. It's informed by Robert Lowell and Sylvia Plath and the piano playing of Judy Sill in particular, whose songs I deeply admire.
Mm,
And yeah, I think that there's an immediacy in what I'm doing right now. And that may shapeshift over time.
yeah.
I might put this record out and go, oh, that felt a little bit too close up. I might create a character next time,
Right.
which would be very Dylan-esque.
Yeah.
But at least that's where I'm at now. I'm doing this sort of really leaning into just laying it all bare and
Yeah. Nice. Is the next record finished? Have you recorded all the songs or where are you
I've
at with that?
written about 25 songs
Wow.
for this record, and I'm going to record in July.
Wow. That's exciting.
Yeah, it's really great. And I'm terrified, but I'm always terrified.
Why?
Um, nervous energy is good energy. If I wasn't scared, it wouldn't be worth pursuing.
Okay.
I think that is that I like it when things feel a little bit intense. I like it when I'm a little bit worried about it. It means I love it. To worry about something is to also for it to matter.
Sure. Just to finish up, Jaxsta is all about giving credit where credit is due. Are there people you'd give credit to for helping you get where you are today?
Absolutely. I mean, you've got to first talk about the band that play on this record. I mean, some people might make their records alone, but I certainly don't.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't play a 12-string Rickenbacker guitar. That's Patrick Sansone. I mean, he's in Wilco. He
Yeah.
produced the record, did a brilliant job.
Yeah.
Absolutely, completely understood that I wanted to pay homage to Dylan, but also to the Laurel Canyon sound. And he really embraced that and did a magnificent job. Robin Hitchcock, who is an amazing guitar player and a brilliant songwriter and also my partner.
Right.
I mean, so much of our relationship has been I feel like an apprentice. He's taught me just so much about life, as all romantic partnerships do, but also about making music, making
Sure.
art. And then John Radford on the drums and John Estes on the bass and Thea Serrano on the pedal steel. They're all to be credited for this record because I certainly couldn't have made it without them.
Yeah, nice. Emma, thank you so much for your time. It was so great to talk to you.
Oh, pleasure. Thanks so much. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
And that's it for another episode of Humans of Music. A big thanks to Emma for her time and thank you for listening. This episode was mixed by Lachlan Mitchell from Parliament Studios in Annandale, and the incidental music and theme song were written and performed by Sam Lockwood. Please remember to subscribe to the Humans of Music podcast so you never miss an episode, or even better, share it amongst your friends and rate and review it. And remember, next time you need to know who wrote a song, who produced a song, who engineered it, who played on it, who sang on it, who did anything on it, head to jaxsta.com for all your official music credit information. Until the next episode of Humans of Music, I'm Rod Yates. Thanks for listening.